Welcome to the Loughborough conversation hosted by the Institute for Advanced Studies. My name is Alena Pfoser. I'm a lecturer in Communication and Media Studies in the Department of Social Sciences at Loughborough University, and I'm very pleased to welcome today Professor Shyam Sundar. Shyam is Distinguished Professor at the College of Communications at Penn State University, and he's also the founding director of the Media Effects Research Laboratory. Welcome, Shyam.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So, Shyam, you have an interdisciplinary background. You studied engineering. You also studied, of course, communications. You worked as a journalist. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how this interdisciplinary background has shaped your thinking, but in particular in relation to the media, to the internet and social media.
Sure. Yeah, I actually started out as an undergraduate in engineering. But at the same time that I was an undergraduate student, I was also working as a journalist, a freelance journalist back in Bangalore in India. And so I had this kind of dual career as an engineering student by day and journalist by evening and night. And when it came time for choosing a career after graduation, I decided to kind of go into communication more. So I got another degree in communication and did a master's in journalism and a PhD in communication and psychology. And so what I do in my work is a combination of these different influences. So I study technology, but I study it in the context of media, especially online news, given my interest in journalism. And so that's how it started, is an interest in technology, but applying to media and how people respond to online media technologies in general. That's where the psychology part comes in.
And you're here actually in Loughborough with a talk on fake news, looking at how fake news are received or affect people. And the phenomenon of fake news has, of course, caused a lot of concern. We all have been talking about it quite a lot. We increasingly find ourselves confronted with disinformation campaigns by states, by partisan groups, by individuals. Also efforts at making money in relation to advertising through the spread of fake news. So I was wondering, of course, misinformation and hoaxes have been around for some time. Can you tell us why fake news have become such a major concern for now?
Well, fake news kind of exploded into being as a phenomenon, I think, just this last year during the 2016 presidential election in the US, but it's been kind of simmering for a while. It's a major confluence of several different things going on with the media world. On the one hand, there's increasing interactivity in media where users can generate their own content, and they have the ability to do that to bypass traditional gatekeepers or experts or journalists in spreading news, in creating and disseminating news. So there are these technologies that allow people to create news, and then there are these audience metrics that tell how many other people looked at those news stories and how many people disseminated it and how far it went. And those metrics in turn generate revenue through these services. And so there's a lot of incentive to create news that is clickbaity, where people can click on things and then make money. And so there's this incentivization that happens with the economic aspects of creating false information, whereas previously hoaxes and conspiracy theories were more ideologically driven. Now there's also an economic incentive to do that. And also from an audience perspective, there are these very polarized political environments in different parts of the world where it's very easy to kind of seed a piece of false information about the opposing camp and get a lot of clicks, and that becomes again spread very quickly on the internet thanks to the interactivity of the medium.
So it's also linked to a shifting media environment, of course. As a scholar of social media, of online media, is that something that you saw coming, that in a way was to be expected? Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think fake news. For me, the earliest example of fake news driven by the internet was this case of former Kennedy press secretary Pierre Salinger, who famously went on major news media in the US, like CNN, back in the 1990s, claiming that the US Navy missiles shot down TWA-800 flight that went down off the coast of New York, where previously people thought that was an accident or some kind of a bomb on the plane. But he said he claimed no information. And how did he get that information? He got it through some documents that were sent to him via email. And so he, of course, in those days, when you got some document that looked official, you believed it, and he did. But then the news media kind of followed up on that story and quickly found that to be false and retracted that story. But that was in the 1990s. But now things are moving at such speed on the internet. People are retweeting information immediately as soon as they see it. So even retractions cannot catch up with the spread of false information. So the kind of speed with which social media are developing have made it very difficult for facts to become accurate before they are spread. So as a result, there's a lot of inaccuracies going viral all the time.
And you've been looking at this from a psychological angle. What would you see as some of the psychological reasons for this phenomenon of fake news?
Yeah, I mean, psychologically, most people think that fake news thrives because of confirmation bias, which is the idea that we as humans tend to believe in information as well as share that information, which confirms our prior existing attitudes. So when you are a supporter of one candidate and you see a news story that speaks ill of the opposing candidate, you tend more easily to believe it because that's part of your selective filter, and it kind of confirms your worldview of which candidate you favor and which candidate you don't favor. And so you don't think twice about forwarding a story that speaks ill of the opposing candidate. So that's one kind of common assumption that people make about the reason why fake news is popular. But that, in my mind, that speaks mostly to kind of partisan information, especially political information. But you do see fake news about virtually every type of information. You see fake news about health, fake science stories, about climate change, so many different things. And so I don't think confirmation bias is the only explanation. I feel like in my own research, I feel like it's lack of attention to sources, online sources, that is a bigger contributor. In the history of media and history of journalism, source is a very sacred concept, right? So whenever we get information, news information, we evaluate that information alongside the source signal. Source credibility is a very big deal. Whereas in the online world, it's kind of murky who or what the source is, where are we getting that information from. And so newspapers sometimes give us information through online websites, but we also get information from other sources that are not traditional newspapers or news organizations, even sources that are blogs and your friends on social media and things like that. What our studies show in my lab is that people are not making a clear distinction in the perceived credibility of the different kinds of sources, that they don't recognize the news organization for all the journalistic work that it does in terms of fact-checking, double-checking facts, or verifying it through two different sources, all the usual practices of good journalism. They don't seem to value that as much as they probably should, because they are equating it to pretty much the same value as stories coming from other sources. So I think a kind of a gradual devaluation of traditional gatekeeping or traditional journalistic sourcing kind of underlies this phenomenon of fake news, and also the tendency to kind of overbelieve your friends as sources. You think that your friends can do no harm. After all, they are your friends. So when a friend forwards a story, you don't stop to think that this might actually be harmful or this might be false because it's your friend that you forwarded. So your antenna are down and you don't systematically process that information.
So you would say that there's a fundamental difference in the way how we consume news through traditional media channels and online, that the way how we interpret and verify information is
especially
different.
With sources, right? I mean, in traditional media, the source is very obvious. If you watch a TV channel, they even have the logo pretty much all the time on the TV channel, or a newspaper has a masthead and almost every story tells you it came from that newspaper. But online, the pedigree of a piece of information is often unclear. And so that's where the source confusion lies. And so as a result, people just ignore the source aspect, which historically speaking is very important. It's a sacred part of communication. And also sometimes another phenomenon is the phenomenon of customization with online media, where you and I can be our own gatekeepers. So when we customize our portals or when we customize our smartphones, right, we create our own little gates. We say we want information only about this particular football team, or whether about this particular town and things like that. So what our studies show is that when people consume information in an environment that they have customized, they are much less likely to process that information systematically. So we've done studies where we've had fake health stories about how sunscreen is bad for you, or how pasteurized milk is bad for you, and we find that people are more likely to believe such fake stories, which by the way are urban legends floating about on the internet, when we give them these stories within their customized portals like My Yahoo or one of those portals. If they have customized their portal and we give them the fake story in that portal, they are less likely to systematically evaluate that information than if they came across that information outside of their portal. So somehow you having created that information environment or customized that information environment makes you kind of more vulnerable to believing in fake news.
Right. And would you say that this whole discussion around fake news that we find now in the media has made people more sensitive for what is fake news and what is real news, if you want? Is there a greater sensibility that we can now find, that people are more skeptical about the sources that they...
Well, they should be more skeptical, right? But what unfortunately is happening is, there's a hunger for information, especially at times of crisis or disasters when things are moving at a very rapid pace. People are they're grasping at straws to kind of get information. And so those are the moments when fake news, creators strike. Recent hurricanes, for example, and also the Las Vegas shooting. Lots of fake stories came out soon after the incident because everybody has an appetite at that time. They're vulnerable at that time. And so it becomes very difficult for the average reader to evaluate what is fake and what is real when things are moving fast and there's no real basis for some of the information. And so I hope some of these efforts that as researchers are putting forward, including our efforts in media literacy, will make people stop and wonder if it probably is false, especially in the immediate aftermath of disasters or fast developing stories, where they would check on some basic things like whether it has been verified by an official source, whether the story quotes somebody of authority and things like that. The standard things that people should look for when evaluating a piece of information.
So who would you think is to blame then for the fake news phenomenon? Is it the people who rely on their friends and are not skeptical enough? Is it the interactive media themselves?
Well, it's a confluence, right? I mean, there are lots of things that are coming together to make this happen. I don't think we can attribute blame on any one party. Of course, people who are willingly spreading, or people who are actually conspiring to create false information and spreading it, they are of course the people to ultimately blame. But in terms of audience susceptibility, I think we're at a time in history where we need greater awareness and greater media literacy campaigns to help them realize that that there are these criteria by which you have to evaluate information. So in a way, this kind of is a smaller example of a larger issue of internet credibility or web credibility in general, where people are getting information off the internet all the time, and often the information is not quite credible. And so we've now started teaching our undergraduates on how to evaluate information when they get information from the internet, for example. Similarly, I think we have to teach the next generation of our students and citizens about how to evaluate news information that they get through different kinds of online sources, and what are all the different red flags to look for when seeing a piece of information that might potentially be false.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, because a lot of attention when we focus on the problem of fake news and solutions to it has been on the platforms and how they can control the information that is released, and how they can police the information that is out there. But a psychological perspective offers us a slightly different angle,
Right.
and media literacy is one of the key concepts here.
Yeah, and in fact, even some of the media companies and some of the companies like Google and Facebook have come out with tips on how to detect fake news for their readers, and so that they have a checklist, so to speak. But ultimately, the people who are smart enough to create fake stories will work around those categories of the checklist and come up with fake stories that are more believable, right? So it's a bit of a cat and mouse kind of game that is being played. And this happens even with any kind of research relating to online privacy or security, where you come up with a solution saying you have to have this kind of password, or you have to have two-factor authentication and so forth, and then hackers will find a way around it, and then you have to come up with another patch to kind of work around that. So I feel like fake news vigilance will need to evolve through a few iterations of us coming up with some guidelines, and then watching how the fake news creators kind of work around those guidelines, and then looking at audience susceptibility, coming up with better guidelines, and in general increasing kind of the alertness of the average online consumer to the possibility of information that they come across being potentially fake.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to talk about is like more generally about how do social media work, and what possibilities do they offer for users. You've done a lot of research around the agency that social media give to users and how they structure the user experience. Can you talk more generally about how does technology afford agency?
Sure, yeah. So agency is a concept that is somewhat complicated, and it is related to the whole notion of sources that I just talked about. So agency I conceptualize agency as a kind of an affordance or an action possibility that is afforded by especially social media and in general newer digital media. And what I mean by that is when users are able to create their own content, and when users are able to customize their information environment, when users are able to curate information on behalf of their network, for their network, these are things that were historically done by very privileged professionals who were sitting in newsrooms and had access to very expensive media channels. But now you and I, can customize our information environment, we can curate information for our networks of social media friends, and we can also create brand new information with a blog post and so forth. So this for me is the source of, is the idea of agency, that you and I can be a source of information or source of communication. Now, agency doesn't stop right there. When we look at other people like us, our peers, they are also agents. They're also creating content. They're also customizing. They're also curating. And so what happens is they bring to the information universe their points of view. And so there's other agency as well. And one of the kind of trends we are seeing is that we pay a lot of attention to other agency, especially in the form of audience metrics, like how many other people bought the same product that you're considering on an e-commerce website, or if you're looking up a hotel in a vacation spot, how many other people have reviewed it and rated as 5 stars or 4 stars and things like that. So now we are attuned to our peers reviewing for us about various things, not just news, but products and hotels and things like that, where previously 10, 12 years ago, you would just make a cold call a 1-800 number and book a hotel room. Now you cannot even think of booking a hotel room unless you see reviews by other people like you. So this kind of audience metrics is generated because a lot of people are expressing agency online and having their say by reviewing these various products and services. And so other agency has gotten converted to audience metrics, which has what we call a bandwagon effect on people. So average online user is now so driven by bandwagon effect. We've shown in experiment after experiment that they will disregard, even if you tell them about the negatives of bandwagon effect, not to go with how many people forwarded the stories, or not to go with popularity metrics. They still are very much drawn to bandwagon. They still make much of their judgment based on what other people feel rather than they themselves. So in addition to self-agency, other agency is an important aspect of modern digital media, especially social media, where the different agencies are kind of coming together. And a third type of agency is machine agency, which is becoming increasingly common right now because of artificial intelligence, because of developments in technology. We are now able to have machines that are autonomous in their creation of information, in their curation of information, and so we are living alongside algorithms and robots that tell us what is the right fit, what is the highest rated something, and they give us information. When you are at home with a smart speaker, you ask the smart speaker like Amazon Echo, Alexa, what's the weather like today? You don't question it. I mean, it's there's an algorithm out there that has certain biases inbuilt in it. There's a particular website or a particular location from which Alexa gets the weather information, but you don't really think about it. You think of Alexa as, and so that's an example of machine agency. And there's a lot of research done, psychological research done, that shows that how people treat machines as if they're human beings. And they apply the same rules of social interaction that they do with human-human communication. And so we welcomed machines also as part of as autonomous agents or independent agents. So this again it sits alongside, and now with all the Russian bots and things like that we're talking about, even bots are creating tweets and creating news stories and so forth. So that's an example of machine agency. So they're all coming together in different ways online, in social media especially, where we are seeing exertion of agency not just by us as individual consumers, but also by the collective consumers, and also by machines. So that's kind of briefly the explication of agency, the way I see it.
Yeah, so it's quite a complex picture that we see here. If we look at the relationship between what you call self-agency and the agency of others, I think it's interesting to see that there are these maybe even like counteracting tendencies. On one hand, individualizing tendencies that you get with social media, but then also our inclination to listen to others, and we're increasingly confronted with the opinions and decisions that others are making online.
Yeah. So there's on the one hand the human will to kind of assert one's individuality, one's identity, and that's kind of what we do with self-agency. So customization, we found in some of our studies, primarily has effects on the way you see content online in terms of verifying your identity and reifying your identity. It actually enhances your identity because you're creating a worldview that is very much centered around your personal identity. So identity is very critical, in addition to the idea of you having control over your information environment and having greater involvement when you customize. But that is, like you said, at tension with other agency, where you're also at some level sheep. You have this herd mentality where you find comfort in the crowd. And so you believe more in the wisdom of the crowds for many things, especially things that are outside of your direct individual experience.
So, and what about machine agency? We increasingly make decisions based on algorithms, suggestions by algorithms. We have Alexa at home or some other some other machines telling us what to do, making suggestions. Do you think that this is a problem? Should we be looking more carefully what is happening here?
Well, I think in general, this is another kind of agency, machine agency, that is necessitated by certain efficiencies that we seek in our day-to-day environments. We want machines to do things that are so routinized that we don't want to waste a human being necessarily. It's probably easier for us to just seek information from a machine butler rather than a real butler who has to kind of go across and look for information and then get it from a particular source. We also would like our homes to behave in ways that adapt to us rather than us having to go and turn on the thermostat or tinker with the lighting level and things like that. So there are lots of efficiencies that can come by using machines effectively for making our life better and easier and getting more information. So that's the whole idea of Internet of Things, for example, is started with the whole supply chain, use of machines in supply chain. So we could track where things are going, where our packages are going, with each area, with each location being connected to the internet, and be getting signals about. So we're getting more information in general because of machine involvement and because of the existence of machines at different parts of the process, and then that applies also to information and communication as well. So I don't necessarily see that as a problem. Where it might become a problem is when we don't question the source from which the machine gets information. So when it comes down to communication, the big problem I see is the lack of detail about how Alexa gets information, for example. The other problem is privacy and security. So machines will take a lot of data about you in order to serve you better. And so a lot of the emphasis is on personalization. So personalized services being offered by machines means the machine knows you as a person, as a unique individual. So there's a lot of personally identifying information that the machine gathers about you. And that can make you vulnerable because machines can be hacked. And so in that respect, people have to be careful about that, and people have to be vigilant and have to follow rules like changing passwords often and things like that to kind of safeguard machine vulnerability, safeguard their own information from machine vulnerability and things like that. So these two issues about machines lacking information about the pedigree of information that they supply, as well as them collecting private information that may not be secure in ways that we would like, are challenges that we are facing with machine agency. I would see them as challenges that potentially have solutions, both in terms of engineering solutions on how we could make machines perform better in terms of these two categories of worry, and also media literacy among consumers on how they should take pertinent action to make sure that they are not being misled by the foibles of a machine, so to speak.
So do you think there should be more control than in relation to the kinds of machines that are built in relation to privacy issues?
Yeah, more kind of controls and more awareness, right? More controls on the part of the technology, and more awareness on the part of the user. And so one of the problems with machines exerting agency is very quickly, psychologically, we approximate the machine to a human. And then we make all the assumptions about machines being human, including wrong assumptions about them being responsible or them being, very protective of your privacy and things like that. But if anything, we know machines are very good at transferring information. And so, there was this hilarious video by ACLU a few years ago about ordering pizza, where a person, calls up a pizza company and orders pizza, and then the representative says that the health insurance system talks with their system saying that you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol, therefore your pizza will go up because the health insurance premium goes up. And then it also talks to the police system where there's been a robbery in your neighborhood a few days ago, so the extra cost of insurance for our delivery man will make your pizza go up even higher. And so it ended up being $67 for a pizza. And so it snoops and looks at different things and then puts the information together. That's the new world of interoperability among machines. That's how IoT's Internet of Things work. Is they are useful only when they can pull things about you from different systems and make sense of it. So when machines are making decisions, this is really the kind of heart of artificial intelligence. You have to then worry about the extent to which you will still have control over how those pieces of information come together. And there might be some genuine areas of worry that you don't want. I mean, you may not want certain types of, and that's when you have to be vigilant and you have to take some decisions about what are the kinds of information that I'm willing to enter into a system, and what are the kinds of information that I will only do it offline, that will never be digital, or never be digitalized in ways that can be tracked by a system and then shared with another system. So machines sharing information amongst themselves is kind of the scary world for most consumers of the future, but it can also bring in a lot of efficiency. So there's both good and bad with what's coming.
Yeah, and the joke that you mentioned about the pizza, of course, it's a joke, but it's also a dystopian scenario of some sort. Yeah, and do you feel that people are anxious enough about what could happen in relation to?
Yeah, I think people are reasonably anxious, probably sometimes overly anxious about these scary possibilities. When the ACLU video came out, this was back in 2004, I think, and then they said this is how the scenario would be 10 years from now. But we still haven't gotten to that point of where all these systems talk together to be able to determine the price of your pizza. But there are other applications that have kind of come close to that, or they seem to go toward that kind of a reality. And so some people might look at it as a dystopian phenomenon or a dystopian world. Others might look at it as a super convenient paradise, if you will. But the idea is, if you're not able to make sense of it in ways that will serve your ends, in ways that will protect you as a human, then you have to take action. And so I think at some level we are going to have to teach our students and our media consumers ways in which that they can take care of themselves in the face of machines and how they deal with machines. Maybe one of the things that we should talk about is how to interact with robots, how to interact with different kinds of algorithms, because that's not something that people know naturally how to do. These are learned behaviors. What people know naturally how to do is how to interact with other humans. And so their default script very often is interacting, and often interacting socially with machines. But they should also understand at some point that machines don't have the same level of feelings and emotions and discreteness that you would expect of other human beings. The boundaries are very fuzzy between systems. So it's not like a confidant that you're sharing private information with. And so these are all things that are much more nuanced in human-human communication that may not be true with human technology interaction. And so we have to educate our consumers about some areas where there might be this kind of a difference between human-human and human-machine interaction, and that might be the way forward in terms of a happy coexistence.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, that we're actually entering new sets of relationships with machines and not just humans.
Yeah.
Fascinating. In the end, I just wanted to ask you if you've been doing research on the internet and social media for quite a long time, how your own perspective on this media has changed. It's quite a big question. I realize that, but are you more skeptical? Are you less optimistic than you were when you started out, or?
No, I think if anything, I'm more optimistic. And historically in our field, and especially in communication and in other academic disciplines as well, there's a tendency to kind of be wary of all these newer technologies and how they might, detract from the essence or the sacredness of human-human interaction and so forth. That's a very standard script that we've gone through ever since the invention of the printing press, where every technology seems to threaten the previous way of communicating or previous way of doing things. And so a lot of scholars, when computers came along and computers showed the promise of enhancing communication, a lot of scholars start talking about how computer-mediated communication really kind of takes away the richness of human-human interaction, takes away the cues. They called it cues filtered out sets of theories, cuelessness theories. The idea is that the interaction is not rich enough, and therefore it robs us of some of the nuances of human-human communication. But when you stop and think about it, there are lots of things that technologies are able to do for us that we would not be able to do face-to-face. There's this concept of hyper-personal communication. So the idea here is that you can actually do more things, have an ideal self of yourself presented. Your identity can be celebrated in ways that you cannot do in a face-to-face conversation, but you can Photoshop yourself and make sure that you get just the right picture on your Facebook profile, or you can say the right things. You edit your emails, edit your chat messages in ways that make you, come off just right. These are all possibilities that don't exist when you're just meeting somebody face to face in a casual coffee conversation. And so, in that respect, it gives us more control, it gives us more power, and it helps us engage with other people in our own terms. And so, there are certain advantages of being able to use media for our own good. And so I kind of remain optimistic about all the different affordances or action possibilities that are presented by newer digital media, where you can communicate with people with much richer modalities. You can show people pictures and videos. In fact, many applications like Snapchat are built around you telling stories based on images and video, where previously it was mostly face-to-face conversation or text at best. You can also have a higher level of agency, like we talked about, greater emphasis on you as a source and others as sources, and greater emphasis on interactivity. You can interact in richer ways. You can swipe and tap and all of that, and you can also have a very contingent conversation with other people back and forth, like message interactivity applications like chatting and SMSing. That's really what a lot of people all around us, when they're engaged in smartphones, that's what they're doing, is they're interacting. They're interacting much, much more than ever before in history, and that's essentially because of the affordance of message interactivity that's made possible by a whole suite of newer digital technology. And also finally, navigability is another affordance that we did not have with face-to-face. We cannot traverse new spaces. We cannot explore new worlds without the aid of technology. Now with virtual reality, we are able to go to different places by being in one physical location. We're able to experience different things. And even in a simple example of a smartphone or a website, you're able to navigate the interior design of a space that somebody has created for you in ways that are very individualized, in ways that you want to explore rather than some other gatekeeper telling you how to explore a space. So there are different ways in which these affordances of modality, agency, interactivity, and navigability can really enhance the richness of communication. So I remain very optimistic about the media's role in human affairs in general.
Shyam, thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.